follow our careers service on Twitter. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our guest speaker, Thomas Davis from the Government Office for Science. Thomas is an experienced data scientist with demonstrated history of working in government administration and energy industries. There'll be plenty of opportunity at the end of the talk to ask Thomas questions, and I kindly ask that you put your questions in the chat facility where Sarah will collate them ready for the Q&A session at the end. I'd like to say a big thank you to you, Thomas, for taking the time out of your busy schedule and come and speak to us today. So I'll now hand over to you. If you want to take control at the top, Thomas, are you okay there?
Yeah, I think I've got the ability to navigate the slides. Perfect. I think if I just test it, does that work or no?
No.
Sync to presenter. So if I just take control then.
Perfect.
Cool.
Should be fine.
Amazing. Thank you, Claire. So as Claire just gave a bit of background, so my name is Thomas. I'm a data scientist based within the Government Office for Science. The department I work at is part of the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, mainly focused with the Science and Innovation Directorate. However, we are not a ministerial department. The head of Government Office for Science is Sir Patrick Vallance, who's been leading a lot of the COVID-19 work with Chris Whitty and Boris. So you might have seen him on TV, you might not have. So we are a independent advisory body and we advise government departments across the civil service on all things science. So you have Patrick Vallance, which is the Chief Government Scientific Advisor, who's at the top. And then you have Chief Scientific Advisors based within every single department. So the Department for Transport has their own Chief Scientific Advisor. The Welsh Government has its own Chief Scientific Advisor. And they all collate and feedback to Patrick. And the purpose of Government Office of Science is to provide the impartial scientific advice on all things, whether that's health policy, epidemics, or things related to the unpronounceable volcano in Iceland when that erupts. So advice to the government ultimately on scientific matters. However, Patrick Vallance, the government chief scientific advisor, is also the government's chief technology advisor. So they're kind of combined, or we like to say he has two hats. And data science and a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is focused largely within the technology side of the Government Office for Science. So we haven't changed our name to Government Office for Science and Technology, but that could happen. We don't know yet. Because yeah, I just want to go into a bit of background in terms of where data science fits and the importance of data within the tech industry before I go into more detail about more functions within government and the civil service more generally. So the tech industry is kind of derived a lot from software engineering, engineering generally as well, but it has derived, it has gone down a route more focused on data and using data as a resource. And anything from artificial intelligence uses a lot of data in order to actually produce a piece of technology. So I'm actually based within the emerging technology team. So we are a technology focused team within the Government Office of Science. So we look at these, we scan for these. So it's what we call horizon scanning. So we use data. So my team and I, we use data. So that's whether that's patent data or academic research data. And we use that and we use to scan for possible technologies that the government should be more aware about or keeping their eye on. So that's what we call the horizon scanning function within technology and government.
Thomas, sorry to bother you.
Yeah.
Are you using the slides? Because they're not moving if you are.
Yeah, I am. I haven't started, so I just wanted to give a bit of a background.
To check. Sorry.
It's fine. It's just so from a government perspective, we have different levels of sensitivity for the information that we can share. So it's just harder for me to show any slides related to some of the work that we're doing. But I will start going into more detail about where data and analytics fits in government shortly. So the Government Office for Science, so yeah, as I said, we use data science to scan and analyze emerging technologies. So that's where I fit in. So as a data scientist, I use my skills to do that. But there are multiple routes to work in government, so not just within the Government Office for Science, to work with data and analytics and technology more generally as well. So you have the government analyst function, which basically splits a bunch of professions based on their skills and expertise. So just an overview of what the cross-government analysis function is. So it's a cross-government network of 17,000 people involved in generation and dissemination of analysis of different types. The aim is to improve the analytical capability of the civil service and act as a go-to community for research and analyst services within government. That's especially the case for the Office for National Statistics, which is based in Newport, South Wales, so not too far from where you are all based. There is also the mission to support government to make better decisions by helping everyone easily access the advice, analysis, research and evidence they need using consistent and professional standards. So there are a range of professions. I'm going to try to cover most of them, but there are two I haven't covered in this, just based on how niche they are as a profession. But there is links and information related to those professions, so don't worry too much about them. So I'm going to cover the Government Economic Service, the Government Statistical Service, and the Operational Service, the Social Research profession, the Digital Data and Technology profession, which is what I'm a part of. So the two professions are not being covered in these slides, are the actuaries and the geography profession. And we will cover the national security analysts, even though they're not strictly part of the government analyst function. There's a lot of connected skills and expertise there. So we have the Government Statistical Service. The Government Statistical Service is a cross-government network led by the National Statistician based in the ONS in Newport. The GSS works to advise analysis and statistical evidence base to help people make better decisions. The GSS is responsible for the collection and production and communication of official statistics. So anything that goes out to the public, so that includes the recent census we had, for example, that is responsible for the rising responsibility for people who work in the Government Statistical Service. The National Statistician is based within the ONS within Newport as well. So he's the person who leads this, the whole profession. So next you have the Government Operational Research Service, which is actually the first analytical service within the civil service, which came about as during World War II, so to try and make better decisions on the battlefield, basically. So operational research, sometimes known as decision science, is both the application of science and maths to policy decisions. The aim is to improve decisions and make decision making and drive better outcomes. Operational research practitioners often use mathematical modeling and statistics to combine this with consultancy skills in order to advise policymakers on best decision to make based on the data. The Government Operational Research Service supports policy, strategy, and operations in different departments, agencies, and employs over 1,000 analysts. Having conversations with other analysts before, apparently a lot of the operational research stuff that originated during World War II is still being used within the MOD for various aspects of what they're trying to work on. especially more to do with battlefield simulation and how to simulate a what-if scenario. There are crossover techniques with several analytical professions, particularly data science. And there are multiple examples within government, so I've just given that one for World War II. There is a map on the right-hand side. I'm not sure if a lot of people can see it, of the original methodology used in World War II. If you want to have a proper look when the slides get shared afterwards. So the next is probably the more interesting profession, I suppose, on paper, the national security analysts. So they actually exist in a lot of departments. The Home Office has quite a lot of security analysts, especially in the Police and Crime and Commission. So the national security analysts actually come from a governing body of the professional head of intelligence assessment rather than a profession. So it's a little bit different. There's different standards and best practice for security analysts in comparison to other professions. Membership and intent is a bit more vigorous, not as vigorous as working for MI5 or MI6, but in terms of what the security analysts work on, they still have to have quite scheduled background checks, which kind of just shows what kind of data they work on, how sensitive that data is. So they work on a lot of classified stuff, but also a lot of open source stuff as well. So I know that one project the security analysts would work on is crime statistics as an open source piece of data. So just trying to understand and forecast different levels of crime in the UK. So there is a lot of information, as I said, with the links that I provided to, especially with the professional head of intelligence assessment, which will go into more detail about some of the interesting projects that they work on. So next you have the government social research and social science professions. Social science evidence is organised and used in various ways across government, and GSR is just one of them. There's been an increase in interest and demand, especially with GSR, especially with the COVID-19 response. So in terms of decision making and behavioural stuff related to people's behaviours, perceptions, and attitudes towards the pandemic. So there's definitely been a big uptake in this area. So using social science helps policymakers to understand issues associated with people, groups, and society, etc. So I'm not sure if anyone's from a social science background within the core, but there are multiple disciplines within the government social research profession. So people who've studied behavioral economics, for example. There's a lot of crossover with social scientists and the use of statistics and systems thinking. A lot of the census stuff was driven by government social researchers as well as the government statistical service. So example of social science techniques include policy evaluation, so actually understanding the impact of policy. That's especially key with GWP research areas, where they will try and examine the impact of the rollout of different aspects of welfare, especially the case when they rolled out the personal independence payment. So now you have the Government Economic Service. So these are the economists based within government. It's quite centralized within Treasury. There are 1,500 economists across 30 organisations. It's quite big, and we have the most in BEIS. So as I said, Government Office for Science. It's based within the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and there's 500 just in there. So they will be focused on the energy market, for example, would just be one of the areas that the economists will focus on. So it's quite a big range. And the important their job is to embed economics into government decision making. So there's a huge range of things that they work on. There's also a lot of government standards for economists as well as the other professions. So high quality economic analysis is essential to what government does, from negotiating trade deals to building large projects and supporting regional debt, the UK's budget, etc. So a lot of budgeting that comes from Treasury is run by a lot of the economists that they have there as well. So the last profession is the newest profession, which is the profession that I'm a part of, is the digital data and technology profession. The profession was created to help lead the digital transformation in government. It's currently led by the Government Digital Service, which is part of the Cabinet Office. So the cabinet that surrounds Boris Johnson and the Prime Minister, they have the office, the Cabinet Office, which runs a lot of centralised features of government. So the DDAT profession has technical specialists of all levels and include roles in data science, cybersecurity, project management, quality assurance, user research, so like a lot of software engineering based roles as well. An example of DDAT projects, I think the main one that's come out of government is the gov.uk single sign-on. I'm not sure if anyone's used gov.uk single sign-on to check your tax records or your national insurance records, but now they're all in one place. And that was driven by the Government Digital Service for the help of professionals in the DDAT profession. But like I said, it's a relatively new profession and it's growing. There's a lot of space growing in this, and there's a lot of investment from this current government to employ more people in the DDAT space across the civil service. I'll give an example of my colleague who works in the Department for Work and Pensions, who've now set up a team whose job it is just to scan and find new digital or technology products to help people in the department do their job a lot better. And that includes building web apps or data dashboards, etc. So it's quite an interesting space. It's quite experimental as well. So more specifically in the Government Office of Science, I'm just using this as an example, just to kind of hone in and focus of what kind of people will actually work in different areas and different spaces. And it just shows how diverse government can be in the civil service, especially. So there's not just one particular area. And, I gave the example of economists that work on the energy market stuff based within the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So this is just an example of, in Government Office of Science, of the survey that we produced of the skills within our department. So 50% of the people that worked in Government Office of Science have worked in an analytical role currently or previously. However, not all of them belong to an analytical profession. So even if you have a good background in technology, a good background in analytics and data, it's not necessarily required for you to go down through any profession. There are still a lot of policymakers who have backgrounds in data and technology, and that is definitely something that the government's key to drive forward. Obviously, being the Government Office for Science, there's a lot of science-focused areas of levels of expertise, but we also have a lot of epidemiologists who have helped support the COVID-19 response. So they're relatively new, but that's definitely skewed the different skills towards health policy, especially. Again, so this is just kind of like the skills that you kind of see is very diverse. So this is just a word cloud that just kind of show based on what people would define their expertise as. So it's not just one set of skills as a standard for one profession, especially in the case for science and engineering professions. So yeah, we also run drop-in sessions for analytical output to help policymakers with their analytical output. So it's not always driven by analysts, but it's very much consultancy based, especially in a small department like ourselves. There's only 120 of us. So that just kind of gives you a flavour of the kind of community there is. It's very open-minded. It's very focused on evidence. For a lot of the work that goes on. So I've put a list of links. Hopefully, Claire, you can send the links afterwards, and for people to have a proper look at slides as well. But these are just some of the sort of government official stuff around the work that happens. So the Aqua book, for example, is the government official book on mathematical modelling, for example. But the other ones are a bit more interesting in terms of like how to properly visualize from a government perspective and things like that. So yeah, that's the end. I will leave the rest of the questions.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Thomas. That was brilliant. So Sarah, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
So Sarah's our employability officer. We have one question so far, but now's your opportunity to ask questions to Thomas. Either you can come on camera and take your mic off, or you can put them in the chat facility, whichever you prefer, but great opportunity to ask him some questions before he leaves us today.
So we've got one question in the chat at the moment. So what advice would you give to a student or graduate who is thinking of working for the civil service, particularly the Government Office for Science, and what should they be doing now to ensure they have the knowledge and skills to be successful at the application process?
So really great question. So the civil service application process is very different to how you would go through it in the private sector. There are a list of things that are just called civil service behaviours, and you're marked against these behaviours in your application process, and that's the very distinct different thing between the civil service and applying for a job elsewhere. I will send Sarah or Claire, I'll send you a list of resources around that in terms of the application process, but it's very detailed about what the behaviours mean at different levels. And how you should, it will inform how to write your application, basically. So I wouldn't worry too much about the CV. The CV is just very much how you would do it normally. In your background, is the behaviours are the most important part for a civil service application. But I will send those links out for people to do some background reading around that, because yeah, it's definitely good to get those key.
Okay, thank you. So what are the technical skills you're looking for in a data scientist during hiring process?
It depends on the department, so it is a little bit unclear sometimes. It does depend on the department. Again, I'm making note of things to send yourself, Claire. There is a breakdown, a really coherent breakdown that a lot of departments use of what's expected at what level as a data scientist, from both a technical perspective as also the soft skills and the soft behaviours at each level. So that includes so there's one behaviour called seeing the bigger picture. So how do you contextualize the bigger picture into the data science work that you're producing? So yeah, so there's expected behaviors at different levels, and that's both technical and soft skills. I'll send that to you as well, Claire, there's a really good breakdown. It's really useful.
Oh, that'd be really good. Okay, has anyone else got any questions?
Someone's just put in the chat, where can we apply?
So gov.uk jobs is one central point for all departments, minus a couple of government agencies, like the can't remember which government agencies aren't part of it, but they're relatively small ones. I think the Met Office might not be on there, but yeah. So there's gov.uk careers as a central point where you can apply on there and see what jobs are available. You can also sign up to alerts if you want to have alerts for different professions, or the professions I provided. You can have alerts for the government economist service, for example.
Okay, brilliant. I can see that Catherine, you've got a question. You had your hand up. Do you still want to ask one?
Yeah, sure. No, thanks. Hi, Thomas. My name is Catherine. I'm from the School of Technologies. Thanks ever so much for that talk. That was great. I think you may actually have alluded to it just as I formed the question in my head, which was, and when you mentioned, when I say alluded to it, I mean when you mentioned the civil servant behaviours, I think it was, and I'm just wondering, you know, for the benefit of the students, I mean, to what extent would you say, particularly with civil service careers, is the blend of, say, the technical skills with maybe the softer skills, things like the ability to research, to communicate, and to be able to work in teams, to what extent do you think that balance is important, or does it vary depending on the role?
So yeah, obviously it varies greatly depending on the role in terms of the actual technical experience, and I think that's definitely the case for digital data and technology roles. I think there's definitely more of a 50-50 balance, I would say, in a lot of roles that I've seen. Don't quote me on that in terms of like for every single role. I've obviously not seen every single role that's been produced, but I think as you go upgrades as well, like your technical experience is obviously important, but your behaviors become more and more important the more senior you become, in terms of how you actually relate the technical stuff with a lot of the policy government stuff. So yeah, there's definitely a mix. But in terms of what's expected, is very clear from a technical perspective, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. It's very clear what's expected, yeah.
Oh, right, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Thanks, Thomas.
Thomas, just quickly, what are the biggest challenges that you face working as a data scientist in the civil service compared with working with private sector, or, you know, these unicorns that everyone wants to work for?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. It's definitely very different. I think I can't allude too much to my own experience because it hasn't been significantly challenging. I think I've been quite lucky with my role. But I would allude to maybe some of my colleagues who work in ministerial departments, so government departments that are led by government ministers. So, for example, the Home Office is led by Priti Patel. When ministers change, for example, all your work could easily just be thrown in the bin. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is that the political influence and the political changes, and there's a bit of friction on how, especially if you're producing something like quite big from a digital technology perspective, or there's a lot of funding there. Ministers have every legal right to throw that in the bin, because that's just the nature of it changing. But fortunately, in the Government Office for Science, we're in a bit of a bubble, so we're a bit immune to that. It's quite nice.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Is any more questions?
No, there haven't been any more put in the chat at the moment.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, Thomas, thanks so much for your time today. We really do appreciate it. And I'm sure if there's any further questions, then I can drop you an email or reach out to you another time. But hopefully we can welcome you back at some point again. But thanks and best of luck with your career at the moment with the Government for Science. Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you, Claire. I'll send over the links for the behaviours, the data science breakdown for the technical and the more soft skill behaviours, which is more of a breakdown, and also a link to the Gov2UK careers page as well.
Oh, that'd be brilliant. Oh, okay. Thanks, Thomas. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Lovely to see you all. Bye.